Welcome to Skytech-Lens. The US-South Korea alliance has long been a pillar of stability and prosperity in East Asia. In July 2025, both nations announced a landmark trade and investment agreement, aiming to secure their economic futures. At its core, under South Korea would channel $350 billion into US strategic sectors, semiconductors, EV batteries, and robotics, fueling American jobs and supply chain resilience. In exchange, the US would cap tariffs on Korean goods at 15%, offering Seoul vital market stability. This deal was more than economics, it was a bold statement of shared ambition and a signal to rivals like China. The agreement promised to bind the two countries closer, reinforcing both economic and security ties. It was hailed as a model for democratic cooperation in an era of rising protectionism. But beneath the optimism, the deal's success would hinge on trust and clear communication. The deal's headline numbers dazzled, but the details quickly became contentious. The US agreed to lower tariffs from 25% to 15% on Korean goods, in return for the promised investment. For Korea, this tariff cap was essential to justify building new US factories. But confusion erupted over what $350 billion investment meant. Seoul saw it as gradual private sector spending, not a lump sum payment. President Trump, however, publicly framed it as an upfront fee, sparking alarm in Seoul. Korea's national security advisor called the demand impossible, exposing a fundamental misunderstanding. The disagreement froze the deal before it began, with both sides entrenched. The promise of revitalized US industry stalled, tangled in rhetoric and mistrust. The grand vision was now clouded by a basic failure to agree on terms. Tensions exploded in September 2025 at a Georgia battery plant, a flagship of the new partnership. Over 300 elite Korean engineers, in the US to install advanced machinery, were suddenly detained in a surprise immigration raid. Treated as illegal migrants, they were deported without charges. Their return to Seoul broadcast as a national humiliation. The images of top engineers arriving home with belongings in plastic bags became a symbol of betrayal. The raid halted not just the factory, but the entire $350 billion deal. Months of goodwill evaporated in a single afternoon. The incident transformed a technical dispute into a crisis of trust. Korean outrage surged, and the US was seen as an unpredictable partner. The diplomatic firestorm threatened the very foundation of the alliance. The promise of partnership was now overshadowed by anger and disbelief. The deportation images unleashed a wave of outrage across South Korea. Media and politicians united in condemning the US, framing the incident as a national insult. Protesters filled Seoul's streets, demanding respect and an end to the investment deal. The public saw their country's best talent humiliated after risking investment in America. President Yoon's administration, under immense pressure, shifted from optimism to stern demands. Lawmakers from all parties called the raid an act of bad faith, threatening the alliance. The sense of betrayal ran deep. Korea believed it had honored its commitments. The Georgia raid shattered trust, suggesting rules could change at any moment. The emotional damage was profound, and calls to abandon the deal grew louder. Repairing the relationship would now require more than financial negotiations. The investment deal was frozen as Seoul demanded concrete safeguards before any capital would flow. The focus shifted from investment to rebuilding trust. Korea's top demand, a currency swap line with the US Federal Reserve to protect against financial volatility. Memories of the 1997 Asian financial crisis fueled these concerns. Without guarantees, Korea refused to risk its economy on American unpredictability. The message was clear: no safeguards, no investment. The grand bargain was now hostage to lost trust. The path to restoring cooperation looked long and uncertain. The White House scrambled to contain the crisis, sending a senior diplomat to Seoul, but apologies were seen as too little, too late. President Trump's public statement, welcoming Korean specialists only as temporary trainers, deepened the insult. Koreans saw this as confirmation. They were viewed as disposable, not partners. The training tools remark became a rallying cry against the US. Each attempt at diplomacy only worsened the rift. The crisis was no longer about trade, but about dignity and respect. Washington's missteps showed a deep misunderstanding of Korean anger. Trust, once broken, proved nearly impossible to restore. The US-Korea fallout sent shockwaves through Europe. The EU, already wary of a similar US deal, saw the Georgia raid as proof of American unpredictability. The US-EU agreement stalled and European capital turned inward, focusing on stability and autonomy. Meanwhile, Canada quietly pursued steady domestic investment and clear rules, attracting global investors. Ottawa's focus on renewables and strategic resources projected reliability. As the U.S. alienated allies, Canada became a magnet for the capital America was losing. The contrast in strategies was stark and telling. The Georgia raid was part of a larger pattern of U.S. unpredictability. In August 2025, the White House abruptly halted the nearly complete Revolution Wind project, citing vague security concerns. Billions in investment were lost, and confidence in U.S. regulatory stability was shattered. Simultaneously, a sudden 50% tariff on imported copper sent global markets into chaos, hurting U.S. manufacturers more than China. These actions, combined with the Korean debacle, painted the U.S. as a risky place for long-term investment. Investors and governments alike grew wary of sudden policy shifts. The message even fully permitted projects and established agreements were no longer safe. The U.S.'s reputation for stability was rapidly eroding. In global business, trust is everything. The collapse of the U.S.-Korea deal showed the cost of broken trust. America's reputation as a safe investment destination was badly damaged. Companies need predictable rules, reliable visas, and respect for agreements. The events of 2025, raids, tariffs, and project cancellations, undermined all three. As Canada and Europe doubled down on stability, capital began to flow away from the U.S. The story is a warning. Economic strength depends on reliability, not just market size. America's welcome mat has been rolled up, and rebuilding trust will take years of consistent, respectful policy. Only then can the U.S. hope to regain its place as the world's preferred destination for investment. Thanks for watching. Subscribe to the channel for more updates.